You have 15 minutes, Pastor Nims. You're on mute. We can't hear you at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks for the assistance, Leona. I appreciate that. Okay. Hi, David. Thank you for that introduction. I felt a bit embarrassed. I thought, oh my gosh, okay, is that was that me? Okay, but seriously, folks, what a privilege it is to be at this declaration and New Year, prayer walk and the whole dimensions of what the Well is doing with Tear Fund. And I'm excited about the journey we are on. I think it's so important that we become advocates for against injustice, advocates for prosperity across all communities. One of the things that I'd want to share is something that happened with the Black Lives Matter, which all of us were all around the world, everybody knew about that many years ago. And something happened to me during that journey, and this was post a lot of the things that David had alluded to. I remember going out on the streets, and whilst walking on the streets with thousands of folks from all across this nation, it was evident that there was an absence of leadership. And why I say that was I found myself wandering through the crowd until at one point I was at the very front of the crowd. And at that point, I noticed that the crowd was not too sure where they were going, and there was no plan. And so they started going onto Victoria Street. And I noticed that because I was now near the front, or at the front, where I turned, the crowd turned to. Not because they were following me, but they were ready to follow whoever was in the lead at the time. And so in essence, that walk, it was clear that people were looking for leadership. And there was an absence of articulated leadership. And I think there is something pivotal here about where is the leadership voice of the church in times of crisis. What do we do when a crisis hits? How do we respond to a situation when we need to be responding when we have crisis in our city? How do we respond when we have crisis in our nation? I do apologize, there's a phone ringing somewhere and I'm not sure where it is. So I think it is so important that people recognize that we as the church owe it to ourselves to be the voice of our city or our nation when there is a crisis. Now, I came back to my office, and as I was walking back to my office, I came across a zebra crossing. And on that zebra crossing, you know what happens at a zebra crossing? Cars have to stop. And or should stop. So I crossed over, and it hit me that if we're ever going to cross over to the place of equity and fairness for all, it's not a Black issue, it's not a white issue, it's a collaborative issue. And that is where I think the Well is so important. We're not just looking at cultural dynamics of color, but we're looking at what is our collaborative response to the issues that impact one or some of us, or potentially all of us. And so what we did, one of the things I did as a result of that moment was I decided to contact a very good friend of mine, Baroness Philippa Stroud, who started the Center for Social Justice with Ian Duncan Smith. And having done that, she said, Nims, what do we do in this? And I said, what do you do? She texts me, it's like, look, I'm white, what do I do? And I said, yeah, it's not about your color, so I said, yeah, what can't you do? So we text back and forth until we agreed that there was a collaborative response that we could all put together. And so we started the Race Equality Commission, which is ongoing, set up in number 11 Charles Street, housed under the Lagadam Institute, because I realized, certain times we need to bring the influence of our relationships into moments like this. The Bible tells us, and I want to be biblical about why I'm giving you this pathway. In Jeremiah 29, verse 7, because we're looking at a theological framework upon which we feel there should be a practical demonstration of a theological pathway. So in Jeremiah 29, verse 7, the Bible says, and seek the peace of the city, which have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace thereof you shall have peace. Now, that is such a strong theological demand. God is making a strong demand upon us to seek the shalom. What is the peace, the shalom, the well-being of our city? And it denotes more than the absence of war and conflict. But we know that shalom it speaks about harmony, the wholeness, the soundness, the well-being, and the success in all areas of life for our community. So what are we doing to seek the wholeness, the soundness, the well-being, the success of our community? So what we decided to do with the Race Equality Commission was we decided to have do an understudy. We got commissioners from different walks of life all across the UK, and we decided to drill down on government data. What does the government data say around housing? What does government data say around the issues in regards to education? What does the government data say in relation to parenting? What does the government data say in relation to employment? We looked at a whole range of government data, and we've been drilling down on that. And now, having looked at the government data, we've now moved into communities, and we're going across communities to say, how does this data relate to your lived experience? Is your lived experience in alignment with the data the government set has given? Because we know that what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And we know that it's the basis upon how the government, whether it's the census, or however else they choose to read data, those things define how our society is managed. And it's not just for the United Kingdom, but that holds true for any nation. In every nation, data drives change. And we as the church, the Bible says, seek, inquire, request the peace of the city for which I've caused you to be held in. So it is so important to each one of us that we understand the data sets. We understand how governments decide. We understand how it's great. Sometimes the church preaches, but the church do not understand the framework upon which circular society is determining the pathways. And if we're going to address poverty, we need to be around those tables that discuss the pathway out of poverty to prosperity. So one of the things that we have decided within the Race Equality Commission is that we have said that no matter the color of your skin, your cultural experience, or wherever you were born, United Kingdom should be a nation where everybody has a right to prosperity. And so we have decided to pursue this path because it is seeking the shalom of the city. Now, so that when we talk about that, it also refers to the tranquility and that is when I say the tranquility in international relationships, such as peace between warring cities. Because in this nation, we find that we also have a refugee issue. We have a refugee, one might say a crisis, but that crisis is also birthed from an international, if you looked at the international framework of things, many nations cannot deny that they have been impacted by what's happening in Russia. Okay, and I know that I have been approached. This morning I just came back from Dubai, and I was speaking with some government officials in an African nation, and they were talking about wheat, how they don't have wheat, but then that wheat does not exist because Russia and Ukraine, there's been tension there. So what happens is the price gets inflated because of the scarcity of it. And then what happens is we see poverty in other nations. So for me, seeking peace is not just about dealing with gun and knife crime, which I have done for many years, but I'm now looking at the wider scope of what this means. I'm working with certain individuals within the Commonwealth the Commonwealth Enterprise Institute for Enterprise and Business, we're looking at what we need to do to ensure that we are addressing some of the tensions. And obviously, if you want to look at the biblical framework of that, you might want to look at 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14, 1 Kings 4:24, 1 Chronicles 19, verse 19. That looks at international tensions. And I've just given you some scriptural pathways there. I think we can also look at what does that, when we're talking about peace, it can also be experienced as a settled feeling within the nations. I feel that it is so important that in times of prosperity, when there is no civil war, we need to look at how Saul, in times of when there's peace in the land, how what would happen is Solomon will build upon because David was a warring king, but Solomon did not experience so many wars. So as a result of that, he built on the prosperity of the nation. And you see that prosperity and peace comes in when there is no conflict. There's the well-being of the people in the absence of conflict. So I think there's also a thing about peace also being seen in the sense of harmony in relation to our relationships with one another, and that's both inside and outside of the home. I used to be the chair of the domestic violence strategy group in my borough, and I noticed that when there's conflict in the home, and a lot of the tensions we find on our streets comes from the conflict in our home. So what are the programs that we put together to address some of the tensions? I remember a scripture that Jesus said thank you so much, I got 2 minutes left. Jesus made this statement. He said in Jerusalem, he said, if only you knew the things that make for your peace, but they've been hidden from you. Now, in my theological framework and thinking, there are 5 things that are pivotal when you look at peace across cities and nations. One, I look at the parenting that's proper. What are we doing around parenting programs? How does the church, how do we respond to the parenting programs, bring up a child in the way they should go? When they grow up, they won't depart from it. So we look at the pathways of parenting. We look at the next thing a child needs is education. Not only they come out of the home, education that's effective. How do we ensure about education that's effective? What do we do about ensuring that the education of our children are holistic? And it's because obviously if we have failed education, we find that we're producing a generation of young people that are not aligned effectively for a secure future. Then there's achievements that are celebrated. So there's parenting, education, achievement celebrated. If for that person to grow in a holistic emotional intelligence framework, we need to ensure, I don't know, some of you may remember kids coming home or you coming home with a scribble and your mom says, that's a beautiful picture, and puts it on her fridge. It's so important that we affirm and we look at peace in the context of what do we do to give our children and our communities an affirmation. That thing around achievements that are celebrated, it's so important. The last 2 is about communities that are mobilized. So it takes a village to raise a child. We know that. We've talked about Ubuntu before. What's the role of how we raise our children in a wider society? How do we make sure they don't create a parallel society? How do we make sure conflict does not exist outside of the core, that we try to address the tensions that our young people may feel, or families may feel, or communities may feel, and we address those conflicts. I remember the tensions that used to exist in my community within the Greek community and the African Caribbean community. We had to find a way of addressing that. And finally, the things about enterprise that are sustainable. So that is to make sure that we raise these children up to the point that they believe that they have a dream. I used to be a journalist, and I interviewed George Foreman once, and I said, give me a message to young people. And George Foreman said, if they wake up in the morning without a dream, they should go back to sleep. It is so important that we give young people and we wake up with a dream. So PEACE, parenting, education, achievements, communities, enterprise. It's a 5-point word, but it spells peace. There's so much more we could share with you about disruption of peace, but and how do we restore peace in our communities. But I want to thank each one of you for giving me the 15 minutes to share this moment. It's very difficult as a Pentecostal preacher, but I hope this has been sufficed. God bless you.
Reverend Nims, can I just say thank you so much. There was just so much there. We're going to come back together in the Q&A session, and there's going to be a chance for us to ask some further questions, including points about the role of leadership in seeing peace, but also the point you made that we can't have prosperity unless you have a wider context of peace. It's very interesting how you contrasted David and Solomon. So I'm looking forward to our Q&A session. There was somebody in the chat, I think, that wanted a scripture reference that you had put. So maybe if you can put that in the chat, that would be appreciated. I'm going to introduce
no problem.
Next speaker. We have from Tear Fund, IK. IK is a special advisor in Tear Fund for fragile states in West Africa. He's passionate about human flourishing and development in Africa. He's got master's degree in theology, politics, and faith-based organization. He's married to his wife, Love, and they have a son called, I'm going to not get this name right, IK, but I'm going to try, Elaha Nan, and a dog named, spells like sausage. So I'm going to let IK share that. IK attends the New Covenant Church in Abuja, and we're really excited that IK is going to share a little bit about how Tear Fund is working to make sure that we have peace in our community, peace in our world. IK, thank you for joining us. Over to you. IK, you're muted, so we need you to unmute before you can.
Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Okay, continue. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Philip, for the introduction. My son's name is El-Hanan, which is one of David's mighty men. It means a gift from God, a gracious gift from God. But yeah, I'm so privileged to be able to give just some few words on sort of peace practices inspired by peace-building theological framework. That Pastor Nims has just provided us some frameworks and some scriptures regarding. I don't know if you can start with some of my slides. Great, thank you so much. Okay. The next slide, great. So a Tear Fund, for us, just like what Reverend Nims was alluding to, we're talking about how we can just be examples of Christ wherever we find ourselves, right? And a Christian, what is a Christian? Is an imitator of Christ. But yet, there's so many things that Christ said, that's been said about Christ, and I want to just make mention of a few that seeks to sort of perhaps jostle our thinking around this issue of peace and how we reconcile it with the person of Christ. We know in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, we hear that Christ himself is being called the Prince of Peace. Yet when he does arrive in Matthew, he tells people that, do not think that I've come to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And it seems a bit contrasting, but of course, we know that sort of scripture sort of interprets scripture as well. And John tells us a bit further. It tells us that, the peace that I leave with you, this is Christ speaking, is not the peace of this world. And it talks about let your heart not be troubled. So for me, it tells us that, Christ came to bring us what true peace is. And within the sort of the peace building work that we do here at Tear Fund, there is that distinction between sort of negative peace and what would be a positive peace. The next slide would be helpful, thank you. And the negative peace could be a lot more superficial, while positive peace seeks to go down to the roots of the issue. And we don't just seek to abstain from sort of direct or personal violence, but we look at how a particular structures affecting how violence is perpetrated within a community. It talks about how we can look for ways in which we can transform ongoing conflicts in families, in communities. And even more recently, Tear Fund has been involved in a regional discussion in West Africa on transitional justice and bringing peace and having a voice within that context as well. And I wanted to share a very quick story, a few stories. The first one is from Mali. And recently, Tear Fund carried out a peace building training in a small community called Sokora in a region called Mopti. And one particular attendant of the training is a man called Usman, and he's actually the deputy mayor of this small town that has about 20,000 people. But like many societies and trends in a lot of traditional societies in West Africa, it's highly patriarchal, where the voices of those within the margin aren't recognized. And who falls within the margin? Most of the times it's women and children. Their voices aren't heard within spaces of decision making, even within the home and wider within communities. And Tear Fund thought it best to carry out a peace building training within this community. And one thing that the peace building training does have within it is an area called Do No Harm. And what it means is taking a step back from an intervention to look at how broader contexts and mitigate potential negative effects on the social fabrics of a economy. But more personally, it's how we can avoid exposing people to additional risks. And this particular beneficiary, Mr. Usman, realized that for the past 20 years, he's been causing harm in his family, especially to his daughter, who, through his own traditional upbringing, carried out female genital mutilation on her. And as a result, even when she was in her early 20s, she found out that she could just be perhaps just peeing on herself without any notice or any warning. And that's led to a lot of tension in this home between his daughter. But through this training, he was able to sort of understand that, number one, it wasn't as a result of her own fault. And it really broke him and caused a lot of intergenerational healing between him and his daughter. And through that healing, through that training, he felt it, best to share this with, with other men within the society. And of course, as a deputy mayor, he had a lot of authority. And this brought together, great discussions around from young people with the elderlies, with their parents on issues that have been bothering them. And that's one way in which it can begin to break down issues of conflict and how we can actually build peace within our homes. And another example I want to just cite as well is from Nigeria. Recently, we've been carrying out some projects across the region. Currently in Nigeria, there's an ongoing project on how we can promote religious tolerance and better relationships between communities, religious and community diverse communities, and particularly in one community called Bakin Kogi in Kaduna State, we realized that there's a particular road that is seldom plied on, right? And as a result of Tear Fund bringing warring parties, and currently, perhaps you've heard, there's been a lot of ongoing clashes between herders and farmers, especially within the middle belt of Nigeria. And a particular road in Bakin Kogi that nobody dares plow. And I have the picture of the road on the next slide. Perhaps you can go to the next slide, Kate, or people can just see the picture. And looks very deserted road. You can just imagine, all sorts of things that can happen on that road, kidnappings and all sorts. But through Tear Fund's recent interventions, bringing farmers and herders who have been in conflict together to actually deliberate and dialogue and look at how they can actually mend this broken relationship. And through a series of dialogues, Tear Fund has been able to bring peace within this community And recently, some of our colleagues were able to plow this road, and a response from one of them was like, I'm sure you can never have imagined passing this road previously. Why? Because people have been kidnapped and all sorts of different things have happened to people on that road. So these are just a few examples. I can continue to cite a few more of ways in which Tear Fund has been engaged in peace building within the West African region. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, IK. Thank you so much. That was very helpful, particularly your point on positive and negative peace. Johan Galtum's ideas of negative peace is where you have social peace, but not justice. So we'll come back to that in the Q&A. Thank you. I'm going to quickly say that we're going to watch a video now. And this video helps us understand some of the work that Tear Fund is doing with self-help group. And self-help groups are not primarily about finance, but about relationship. So watch this video and let's come back and we can then have our next speaker after this video. Can we have the video now, Leona?
Hi there, my name is Harry Pinder, and I came to the UK 14 years ago as a refugee. I've been a Christian for 10 years, and I fully believe in the local church's ability to transform communities. My mum was a very strong and resourceful woman who started several businesses when we got to the UK. I've learned a lot from her. If you or your family are first-generation Black migrants, you may know that some of our parents set up microfinancing circles or self-help groups. Now, I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but if you're Caribbean, you'd know this as Partner, Ojo if you're Nigerian, and Susu if you're Ghanaian. These self-help groups consist of 15 to 20 people who come together voluntarily to save small amounts of money each week. Now, I can't help but think, if the self-help financing initiative helped our communities here so much, imagine the impact it would have on people living in extreme poverty. The good news is, you don't have to imagine. Over the last 20 years, Tear Fund has been supporting thousands of self-help groups across sub-Saharan Africa.
Join the Awakened Revolution today. To make a one-off donation or start giving monthly, please visit tearfund.org/awakened.
With 1.8 million people impacted, members of these groups can take out loans, set up businesses, helping their families and communities flourish. In the scriptures, when Moses doubted his ability to carry out the task that was bestowed upon him, God said this, "What is in your hand?" Moses already had everything he needed to fulfill his purpose. In the same way, Tear Fund believes rather than giving our handouts, it's about helping people use the gifts and talents they already have to lift themselves out of poverty. Take Marie from Rwanda. Hopeless after losing her husband, hard labor was her only choice to provide for her children, shifting bricks until her hands were bloody. Despite her efforts, her family still went hungry. Then Marie joined a self-help group. She took out a loan to buy a sewing machine, which she uses to stitch rubble sacks together to make reusable shopping bags. These bring her 112 Rwandan francs, about £90 a month. Now Marie's teaching other women in her community to sew and build businesses. Awaken is empowering people who look like me, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, to start businesses and to lift each other out of poverty. With just £10 a month, you can set up and support a new self-help group.
Thank you. I do apologize for some slight technical issues with the video. Can I just encourage you, if you would love to become part of what Tear Fund is doing and share in the joy of seeing people's lives transformed, there's information in the chat. Do join us in giving to this work. It's not primarily about the finance, even though the finance does make a difference. It's about how these relationships become a support for communities to be able to work themselves out of poverty. This is such an encouraging and uplifting story. So if you'd like to give, please do. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jessica. Jessica also works in Tear Fund. She's a Zambian climate activist based in Lusaka. She's Tear Fund's Global Campaigns Associate and has attended COP26 in Glasgow and was at the Commonwealth meetings in Rwanda. She's a passionate climate activist, raising her voice against climate crimes. She has witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of climate change on the people of Zambia. And Jessica, we're delighted that you can join us. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and particularly on the connection probably between climate and peace. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Philip. And thank you so much to everybody that has joined. And just like from my bio, Philip was mentioned, I'm a climate activist. So I think the first thing that I had, the first question that I gave myself when I knew I was going to talk about peace, I was like, okay, so let's talk about peace and let's talk about climate change. Being a climate activist, I think I speak about climate literally all the time. In almost all my conversations, there has to be at least an aspect of climate. So a quick one, I'm in a country that is in the front line of climate crisis. And when we talk about peace and we talk about climate crisis, I know like lots of people call it climate change, but to me, I've always looked at it as a crisis. It's no longer a change, it's a crisis now. So when we look at the two, like how is the connection? What's the connection? So here's the thing, for those that I have heard me speak before, or for those that I've had a conversation with before, who hear this story maybe for the 100th time or 200th time, I don't know, but I'm gonna say this story again quickly. This is a story I like actually sharing with people when I'm talking about the issues of climate change. 2021, I was shooting a short film on climate change. And I went to part of Zambia, and the locals actually took me to this place that just looked like a beach, but trust me, it was a river. But at that time it was dried up, and it was around October. So it was a time where in Zambia it's actually dry. So when we went there, for me, I was just like filming it. I'm just doing my job and everything. So I met this woman who should have been in her 80s or 70s. And she was drawing water from a very, very shallow well. And she was actually drawing and drinking like right away. To me, I didn't even pay attention. I was just there. I'm just shooting. I'm just doing my job. Then there was a head of cattle that was actually coming. So the locals that actually took me to that river were explaining to me that the head of cattle was from another village, like the nearby village. Even the woman, the older woman that I actually found there, she was from another village. But that water source that was remaining around that time was the only one in that area. And it attracted a lot of people from different, neighboring villages and so on. So how now when we connect, like when it comes to issues of climate crisis and we come to issues of peace, can you imagine a situation where you as a person, for those that are in a country where it's a front line of climate crisis like Zambia, where I'm from, can you imagine you have kept your water in the backyard that you think or know that it will take you for like the next 3 days, then another person comes and just takes it and drinks it because they feel they need it more. Or a head of cattle from another farmer comes and drinks your water. You see how that threatens peace. So it's a conflict in the happening. So what does that mean? I feel like when we talk about peace, there is a huge connection to climate crisis today. There are a lot of countries that have fallen to be in the front line of the effects of climate change, not because they've done anything wrong, not because they're doing things that maybe are contributing to or are raising the effects of climate change, no. But because another individual, another group, another country somewhere is being selfish and they're thinking, oh, it's okay, we can go about with fossil fuels, it's okay, we can increase our carbon emission at the expense of a person who is very, very far away in a country getting to suffer the effects of climate crisis, not because they've done anything, but because somebody else is being selfish somewhere there. So how do you help to actually bridge peace? How do you help to, I feel like I've always felt like when it comes to peace, you don't necessarily have to not fight with somebody who is next to you, but there's certain actions that you have to do so that another person who is far away can actually enjoy the peace. It's like what I'm doing, it may not just be for me, but maybe for another person in another country, maybe for another person in another region, and so on. If we are going to make sure that each one of us, individuals, countries, are adhering to things that we have to, if we are making sure that we don't, we cut out on certain actions, we cut out on carbon emissions, it will mean that a country that is suffering or that is, a country that has been experiencing poverty will get to be in a place that maybe they can get to help themselves and not get to suffer. Right now, we've been talking about, when we talk about the issues of poverty in East Africa, there's a lot of, I think that when it comes to the issue of drought, I think we've had a situation where because they're farmers, a lot of people are farmers, actually they have to grow the crops that they have to eat. But how are you going to grow the crops if there's no rainfall? Even in Zambia, where I am, we have a lot of farmers, but we're at a point where people really cannot even grow crops because somewhere, somebody else feels it's all right, they could just continue with the carbon emissions. Somebody feels it's all right, they could just continue with the fossil fuels and so on. So do your part, like wherever you are, so that at least a country or a village somewhere else, they could live in peace, so that somebody will not go in somebody's backyard to go and steal the water because they don't have in their own backyard. I know some people maybe may not relate, because maybe for you, you just have to go in the kitchen, draw water directly from the tap and drink that water because it's safe. You don't actually get to even have an idea that there are people that have to go and drink water from a shallow well simply because of certain actions that are happening around the world. So to me, I would really, really love for each one of us to get to imagine how all these things actually connect. When we talk about peace, I feel like peace is the last piece to hold a lot of things together. Like love, when love comes together, unity comes together, there's a lot of care coming together. All that will result in peace. All that will result in people being in a place where it's fine. I can take care of my brother. I can take care of my sister. Whatever actions I'm doing, I know that they won't affect somebody else negatively. I think when IK was actually speaking, he actually talked about, I think, the positive and the negative parts of peace. So even as I'm going to conclude, I have 1 minute. So let me conclude with this. I have a scripture that I want to share to the people that are in the front line of climate crisis, and for the people that may just have an idea that there's climate crisis somewhere, but maybe you're not directly affected. All of us are affected, but there's some that are actually really affected so much that today they're suffering with, there's like so much poverty. There's just certain things that they can't do because they're in the front line of climate crisis. So the scripture I'm going to share is 2 Corinthians 13, verse 11. This is going to especially the people that are in the front line of climate crisis. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. So this is a scripture that I want all of us to just get to even sleep on today. Like when you read this scripture with all your heart, you're going to realize that your actions may bring peace to somebody else who is next to you or not next to you, or your actions may actually cause conflict to somebody who is next to you or not next to you. So whatever we do, we can go back to this scripture and just always remember that we have to be in unity. But how does unity come about? There has to be love, peace. There has to be everything that just needs to hold peace together. So thank you so much.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much for that perspective, Jessica. And as someone said in the chat, it offered a global perspective. I wrote down while you were speaking that peace is not just the absence of conflict, but the intention of goodwill towards our neighbor. That's what I heard from you, and I hope we can pick that up a bit later in the conversation when we have the open panel. So thank you for that perspective. Before we go on to have a spoken word piece by Poetess Jess, I want to quickly introduce and welcome Bishop Wayne Perkins, who is, he'll introduce himself. So Bishop, give you an opportunity to, welcome by the way, and give you an opportunity to speak to those that are online with us this afternoon.
Thank you, David, for that welcome. Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Wayne Perkins. Joined Tear Fund yesterday as head of ACE, African and Caribbean engagement program. So I'm really looking forward to working with the team there at Tear Fund, leading on speaking out against poverty and injustice. Really enjoying seeing the work that was going on behind the scenes yesterday as well for a declaration. Absolutely fantastic. I've got to congratulate the team there. Absolutely stunning work that's gone on, and the service yesterday was awesome. So yeah, just greetings to everybody, and it's great to be on board. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Reverend David. Appreciate it. Bless you.
Absolute pleasure, Bishop, and thank you for joining us. I'm now going to introduce Poetess Jess. I've been training her for many years. She's finally graduated from my School of Spoken Word Ministry. I'm not taking any credit for what you're about to hear, because I'm a humble man. She really brought some, I'm joking, I'm lying, but she was absolutely brilliant yesterday, brought some real energy to the program. Poetess Jess is a spoken word artist. She graduated from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. She has had the honor of presenting her ministry on TBN, Premier Radio, BBC, and the MOBA Awards, and also Poets in Action. And also at the Big Church Day Out, she's been on the main stage there. And we know Tim Jupp doesn't just put anybody there. So that tells you something about her ministry. She's been appointed as an ambassador for spoken word for the Eastside Academy, which does extensive work with young people to raise their self-esteem and to raise their academic esteem. And it means that she's connected with hundreds of young people around spoken word. She's won Best Poet, Best Faith Poet, Best UK Poet in 2021, and her mandate is to touch lives through her spoken word ministry. So I'm glad to have been her coach for the last 5 years. No, Poetess Jess, welcome, and we look forward to hearing you again.
Oh, wow. God bless you. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be back here again. Yesterday, we had a wonderful time, very insightful, very informative. If you missed it, then you missed something. So I'm just going to share with you a spoken word. Like I said to the guys yesterday, if you was on the Zoom call, I can't really hear you, you lot are on mute, but can you please interact with me by putting your reactions in the comments? It would help me a grand and a load. So I'm going to speak to you about peace. And to be very honest with you, I actually literally just wrote this piece. It was very hard. The other pieces I wrote before, but peace was I don't know, it was a bit of a hard one to write. So I finished writing it this morning, and here we go. Peace is such a special commodity, so special that Jesus gave it to you and to me. He said, my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. But we live in a world of brokenness. We live in a world where there is no godlessness. There's the fear of heart in man, and people are operating in lawlessness. We are living in a world of destruction. We are not understanding the times, and the only peace we ever know is the Moschino genes, full of peace signs, young people killing one another over street signs, trying to find peace in drugs, alcohol, sex, and screen time. Life's no longer lasting comfort or freedom in their lives, always unsettled, and what they're looking for is hard to find. Some are trying to master peace when their life is in pieces, and that's a cycle that's never really gonna cease. You see, Jesus never gave his peace just to leave. That's the peace that the world gives, a peace rooted in escapism. But the peace that Jesus gives is life-changing, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. The peace that Jesus leaves is a promise of eternal peace to every believer in the midst of trouble, and to every believer that remains, the peace that remains in forever, irrespective of the situation and the struggle. Whether you are broke or blessed, lost or on quest, hurting or at rest, tormented, contentment, believe the report of the Lord and let him finish the sentence. Close or distance, lack of resistance, illusions or reality, confusions or charity. Within the scale of justice, let God's peace be the balancing, because he is the peace that surpasses all understanding. So when the weapon tried to form, no, it is peace that you are demanding. And that is why the word shalom is very deep, because it goes deeper than the peace that we speak. It goes beyond the physical, spiritual, and emotional, social peak. You see, when you have the peace of God, you can speak to every Goliath that is standing in your way. And when peace reigns in your heart, you can speak to every storm and command every wind to obey. And that is Tearfund's prayer, that the peace of God reigns, and that peace brings restoration in broken relationships throughout the nation. Peace with God, peace with ourselves, peace with others, peace with creation. And that is the peace that is within you. It will be seen, and not just in the inside of you, but on the outside of you. But the question is, are we as a church, are we operating in peace? Are we trying to overcome the prejudice that we see? Have we got any enmity in our hearts because we're praying for peace? But does the church know where peace starts? Thank you for having me. I'm Poetess Jess. God bless you.
Thank you, Poetess Jess. I wanted to send something in the chat, but I was so lost in my reflections as I was listening to you and just taking it in. But thank you so much. Again, it was just yeah, I'm glad in a theology session we have a poetry, because the language of poetry touches the heart in a way that very few things do. So can I just now invite David, my co-host, to join us, and can I ask also the other panel members to join us. We're going to have about 30 minutes of Q&A. For the participants, if you'd like to ask a question to the panelists, please do. I'm going to ask if Poetess Jess would also join us, Jessica, as well as IK, and I'd like to sort of open up a time for us to grapple with some questions. And I'm going to ask a question I'd like, in fact, I'd like every one of you to have a chance at having a go, giving your perspective on, and this is what I've been grappling with in my mind. And I do apologize, I've got a bit of a hoarse voice for some reason. It just, I got a sore throat yesterday. Every one of you, including what Reverend Nims was saying and what IK was saying, and the poem was grappling between sort of the inner peace that we have in our hearts, when our hearts feel at rest, when we have this sense of serenity, I think that's the word, and social peace, when there's peace in our neighborhood. And I'd like to know how you see the relationship between inner peace, the peace that the person has in their own heart, and the peace that we see outside. And different people see this differently, and I'd love to ask your views on this. Maybe David, as co-host, I'd like to ask you, David, how do you understand this relationship between inner and outer peace?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. It was a theme that I observed in terms of the themes that were being articulated by each of the speakers. And it strikes me, it's very similar to me to that text where Jesus says that you must love your neighbor as you love yourself. That actually there is a prerequisite for self-peace in order to have peace for the other. That if we don't experience that peace ourselves, it's very difficult to extend it to other people. It almost reverts back to what we heard yesterday, in that if we're not secure in ourselves, then we function from a place of insecurity, and therefore we can't be secure in our relationships with other people. And all sorts of things emerge from that in terms of our own sense of self-deprivation, the way we project negatively onto people, the way we distance regulate from being intimate with people simply because we don't want to leak out some of our own pain. And so it strikes me that, and particularly as Christians, we often try to be, so we want to be the light to other people, but there is something there about being the light and accepting a light within ourselves, that light of peace. And then from that position of peace, engaging with the world. Otherwise, what we do is we simply insert our own brokenness into the world, our own fragility, our own insecurity. And it compounds itself to when it becomes almost a juggernaut that can't be stopped. So I think there's something about being still, discovering that peace. And Paul says about faith, exercise your faith at the level that you have it. Exercise peace at the level you have it. Pastor Nims exercises peace on a national level. Some of us can only exercise it on a local level within our family. Be at peace with that. Exercise peace according to your peace.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Nims, what is your understanding of the relationship between inner peace and what we see going on outside in terms of society?
I think, quite simply put, what we see in society is a reflection of inner peace, or the absence of it. So, what essentially the Bible says, all creation is groaning, waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. And so, even when we talk about climate change, even creation itself, nature itself, is agonizing as a result of the absence of inner peace. We find out from the beginning of the fall of man, when man decided to hide, having allowed sin come in. And what happened as a result of the sin was fear, guilt, shame, and he began to hide within. He began to use nature to hide his shame, but yet nature in itself could not hide his shame. And then you find that conflict begins to exist. Husband blames wife, the woman you gave me. And so you're finding out that conflict is coming into the home, and that conflict, as a result of that, and the blame, God says you're gonna sweat. Man, even to just get food to eat is going to be from the sweat of your brow. We're finding that now, from what we heard Jessica say, you find that climate change kicks in, because what's happening is now we're going to start punishing we're going to start punishing our environment. We're punishing people amongst ourselves. What happens? Cain kills Abel. We start. Why? He says, if only you would, sin has a desire to you, but if only you take dominion over it. But he's able to deal with his internal conflict, and he goes to kill his brother Abel. So we find jealousy kicks in. All these things, the conflict within ourselves, causes us to create conflict in every tier of our society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's not that's a controversial view. I think, Christians do believe that being right with God is the starting point for working out peace in the world. Jessica, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the relationship between inner and outer peace. I'm sure you might agree with the other speakers, but you might have something else to say.
Yeah, Philip, I feel like when they say hurt people, they knew exactly what they meant. So if I don't have peace within myself, I don't know how I'm actually going to ensure that I give it to the next person, to the next country, to the next house, or to the next church. It's quite difficult. So I feel like the energy that I have within me is what I can actually show the world out there. And that can happen so well if what is within me is what I'm going to take out there. When it comes, just to connect with what Reverend is from mentioning, when we talk about creation, okay, this is us, God, making us stewards of the earth, making us stewards of, the garden. Let's take care of it and everything. But for other people that have actually gotten to be so greedy that you feel, okay, as long as I'm getting money out of this, as long as it's increasing my pocket, I don't care what the other person actually, the end result from the other side, how the other person is going to be affected. I have peace within me, okay? I'm not just going to think about what I'm going to benefit from something. Obviously, I'll think about the next person. Being an activist, a climate activist, I have always, because I live in the front line of the effects of climate change. I know what it means when you plant and you're thinking, oh, the rains will come, you're going to grow, you're going to have a good yield, and it does not happen. And moreover, you're literally depending on farming, like solely on farming. What's going to happen? So I feel like when you have the peace, and not just the peace, any other peace, but the peace of God within you, it will be very, you'll be alert. Like you have this conscious to say, if I'm going to act like this, if I'm going to do this, what will happen to the other person? It's like you don't just do things for yourself. You know that it's not just about you. There's Ubuntu. I exist because you do. Whatever I'm going to do will affect you, will affect the next generation. Not just even thinking about what's happening now, but even the next generation. whatever actions that we're taking now may affect positively or negatively the next generation. So I think it's all about, if there's, it definitely really connects, Philip, like what is within me and what I'm going to take out there. Definitely, there's no thin line at all, but it's on the same line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like the same question from you, IK.
Yeah, what can I say? I really agree with what everyone has said so far, and just a scripture that came to my mind when you asked the question was when Jesus says in the book of John, you know, I have told you these things so that you may have peace. And in this world, you would have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And for me, that's, you know, that dichotomy between the negative piece and the positive piece, right? Because it's just like what Jessica was saying and others, you can't give what you don't have. And, you know, Christ comes to sort of give a peace even within a lot of chaos, right? And sometimes it's hard to feel that peace, but it's sort of there. And that is a great, for me, a great motivation to sort of see how can I look for a way to sort of bring peace to the world around me. And you sort of see that there are different sort of layers of where conflict rises, right? You know, sort of lack of peace between me and God can definitely lead to lack of peace between myself and my neighbor. So definitely looking at ways in which we can find peace with God and with others, you know, go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I get David.
Well, yesterday, Philip, you and I had a conversation about this idea of being a wounded healer, of how, despite our own woundedness, God uses us to heal. And I'm going to ask IK to just say something more about, I'd never heard of transitional justice, because I'm trying to link it to what we're talking about now, because at the moment, to some degree, at least in my mind, I was talking polarities, personal peace, and that extrapolates or is projected outwards to a kind of systemic, communal, societal peace. And the danger of that is of that polarity is paralysis. That actually, if I'm not peaceful in myself, then I can't do anything at all. I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I'm saying that's how we often feel as humans. So can you tell us a bit about transitional peace? Can you tell us how it works on a personal level and perhaps how it begins to work on a societal level as it grows? Because I thought that was quite interesting. And then after that, I'm not going to come back again. I want to ask Jessica, Pastor Nims, and yourself, Brother IK, what role does justice play in achieving peace?
Great, thank you so much, David. Just to be clear, transitional, it's transitional justice, not transitional peace. So it would sort of help me perhaps answer both questions now, if that's okay. Yeah. Transitional justice. So yeah, like you're right. It's not for one to feel paralyzed, but it's just to know that when you do feel paralyzed, know that it's not you that gives this peace. It's a gift. It's a gift that's been given to you. And you look at Christ on the cross. He's the one who's given the gift. And when you talk about traditional justice, like currently within West Africa, there's a plethora of different types of conflicts ongoing right now. That you know, the Boko Haram crisis, you know, ravaging, you know, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, you know, the ISIS-ISWAP, West Africa crisis. You know, these are all sort of religious violence, extremism. And you ask yourself, with so many people affected by this, in terms of being harmed by this, and also those who've actually carried out these atrocities, how does a normal court system, justice system, actually deal with such a crisis? So that's where transitional justice comes into it. So it looks at ways in which you can have some sort of truth and reconciliation sort of panel, where you look at ways in which those who've been offended can actually look at their offenders in the eye and actually tell them that they forgive them. And this reminds me of a discussion that was had, and I'll just sort of end with this. And it was a guy called you know, John Paul Lederach, and he's talking about you know, mercy, justice, peace, and it's coming from the book of Psalms 85 verse 10. It talks about mercy and peace have met each other, and justice and peace have kissed. And this is in a sense a sort of a dance where justice and peace and mercy all, in a sense, need to be together for reconciliation to take place. But, in and of themselves, they speak up, they have their own voices. People feel that they've been, if the truth isn't told, there can't be any peace. And if there isn't any justice, how can I sort of show mercy to somebody who's offended me? But yet in the place of reconciliation, that's where you see justice and peace and mercy, and truth come together, within this dance. And it sort of helps to think of it that way for me anyways. So TIRFund recently has been involved in a transitional justice framework that the ECOWAS Commission has been working on. So we brought faith leaders from across West Africa to speak into the document, to give it, to let it have the voice of the faith community within West Africa. So just I hope that sort of provides some responses to your question.
Thank you very much. Pastor Nims, and then I'm going to come to Jessica, and then I'll come to the poet Jess as well. So where does justice fit into, because you've dealt with families who have had children killed. You probably buried more people than most ministers in London because of the ministry you've had. How do we reconcile, what role does justice play when it comes to peace? Is it an obstacle, or can it be a real facilitation?
That's such the thing around justice and peace is so strong. I remember when Mark Duggan got killed, and that led to the riots in London, which I happened to be there.
Can you just say a bit about who Mark Duggan is, so that people who don't
I do apologize, folks. The Mark Duggan was a young man that was shot by the police in London, 2011 thereabout. And it led to riots all across, the latest riots that you've ever seen in not our lifetime, but in London, one of the biggest riots in London. And there were different reasons for it. But then one of the things that folks kept on shouting was no justice, no peace. And anytime you find a massive campaign on the streets, it seems to be the outcry of those who feel disenfranchised. No justice, no peace. So in the mindset of many communities, the statement, the alignment, it's saying we are here to create disruption until we feel there's a sense of justice in our community. And we know that that sense of justice is something that we all want to see across our communities. I'm reminded of scriptures that says, Isaiah 1 verse 17 says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. And you know that again in Psalm 37 verse 28, it says the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. We constantly understand that where there is justice, this is what God loves. But in certain, in my work, having worked with very vulnerable families, I've had to say justice delayed is not justice denied. Because sometimes we find that killers have seem to have gotten away with it. But does justice only prove to be justice when it is seen by man? Or do we accept that justice can still exist even when justice is not perceived to have been meted out to those who create injustice? Now, I am reminded of the rich man and Lazarus. It might have seemed that the rich man got away with it, but Jesus shows us a picture hereafter. And I think we need to understand that whilst we must pursue justice, we should not accept that justice in itself must be meted out for us to see before we allow peace in our hearts. So some families who have had their loved ones killed, I've had to say to them, give forgiveness. Justice belongs to God. Justice does not belong to man. And transitioning justice to the place of the divine judge of the heavens and the earth, being able to get to that place where you can say to a woman or father or children or family who have lost a loved one, or to some who have dealt with on the rape situations or other injustice that has been perverted on others, how can we allow justice to be seen to exist even when it may not be seen to have been meted out in our experience. Because if we're only waiting till we see justice, we may never have peace. So we need to know how we believe in the Prince of Peace and the God of the judge of all flesh, who even when we don't see justice, we trust him to bring justice. Because that was what Habakkuk had a struggle with. He said, how long will I cry out to you? How long will I see this injustice? But God said, the vision's for an appointed time. Though it tarry, what he should do, wait for it, it will not tarry. And then one of the things he said is, the just shall live by faith. So for us to walk in justice and believe in justice, I believe it's so important for the church to have a message that goes beyond the perpetrator into the God of justice.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to invite Jessica, but just before she contributes, I just realized we're touching on some sensitive issues and there could be some triggers. And I just want to say, if you feel triggered, it may be wise, there's a number of options. You could step away, or you could either reach out to Philip or I or Pastor Nims or somebody that you trust. Will be more than willing to catch up with you after, to pray with you and to direct you where you can get some support. So we want to be responsible in the way that we facilitate this conversation. So if there's any triggering going on, maybe a loss of a family member and a memory from childhood or something, then please just reach out to us privately in the chat. You got our confidentiality kind of ministerial code, and we'll direct you in whichever way we need to go. But we just want to make sure that you're feeling safe and you're feeling that we got you in this process. So we'll go to Jessica.
You, David. Thank you for saying that. I had somebody who sent a chat to me directly saying that, what do you do when you've lost a loved one? So I think this is a demanding and difficult conversation, but thank you for saying that, David.
Absolutely. And I think the point that Pastor Nims made about not having to see justice for justice to be done is a big one. It helps us to reconcile. So Jessica, and then I'll come to Jess. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. To answer your question, the role that justice plays in peace, I'm going to quote myself. In the face of injustice, there's conflict. And in the presence of conflict, there's the absence of peace. That is me quoting myself. I'll say that again. In the face of injustice, there's conflict. In the presence of conflict, there's the absence of peace. I'm going to just give a very quick illustration to answer your question that I'll leave every one of us to actually answer on ourselves. Let's take this. This is a pen. Let's imagine it's a loaf of bread. One loaf of bread. And there are two people. Could be two nations, two people, two households, or two churches, or just two individuals. This is 100% loaf, okay? One person gets 90% of the loaf of bread, and the other person gets a 10% of the loaf of bread. Your answer to this illustration is what peace plays, or what injustices plays when it comes to peace. So just this illustration, whatever answer that you've gotten, what's the answer? What will come out? What's the outcome? A loaf of bread, somebody gets a 90% and the other person gets a 10%. What's the outcome? That should give you an answer when it comes to injustice and peace. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. I think that was straight to the point. Thank you very much for that. Poetess Jess, you're a woman, you're a Black woman, and some people will say that in our society, those are arenas for injustice and may affect the way we experience peace. How do you reflect on justice and injustice and peace? And I'll hand back over to Philip after that.
What can I say that hasn't, can everyone hear me? Okay, because my background's a bit noisy, sorry. I can't, what's been said has been said, and I agree with everybody. I think for me as a creative and being in here, you only really think about peace one-sided. I never really thought about the different types of peace, like climate, what Jessica was speaking about. and what my other brother was speaking about, I've never heard of peace in that way. So even when I wrote this poem, it was a bit of a struggle. Like I said, I wrote it today, and it was a struggle because as a creative, you're always battling with the mind, and it's about having peace. And there's also the use of language, the peace in God and the peace of God, and trying to understand the different two. Do I have the peace of God or do I have peace in God? So when I was writing this piece, it was hard because I had to understand which peace am I operating in. But I understood that I have peace with God because I have a relationship with him. But do I actually have the peace of God? So when I look at circumstances of, how I act can also cause an effect to something else or somebody else, to climate as well. I didn't think of, wow, Jess, I didn't think of peace in such a way. When I look at his, our brother spoke about the Mark Duggan, because it didn't affect me individually. Yes, there was an uproar, there was a lawlessness, we had fires and riots breaking up, but it didn't affect me. So I didn't have any concern for it, but I didn't think about anybody else. So this conversation really takes me back to, what do I stand for, and what do you stand for when we're not as just a Black woman, but as a Christian woman? Because when we're looking at these things, we can't look at it objectively, we have to be subject. So the conversation for me just makes me look at peace, not just peace in everything being calm and there being peace in the storm, but if I don't react or respond in this way, then it can also affect somebody else in that way. And if we're talking about having unity within the church, well, I can't just have peace within myself, but I've got to be careful about the decisions and the choices that I make as an individual. So in spite of being a Black woman, but as I stand for being a Christian woman, anything that I do or the decision that I make is also going to affect somebody else. So I can't really bring much to the conversation, but that's how it's made me reflect. It's made me think, not so objective, but on a wider scale, that I might say no to this, but me saying no could affect the poor person. It could affect the country over there, the country that's in war over there. And because it's not affecting me, do you know what I mean? I can't just I can't be selfish with peace. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense to you guys, but.
Thank you so much. No, indeed, and I'm glad that your participation in this theology session also allows you to reflect on wider issues, and that then gets reflected in the poems that you write, which is wonderful. For me, theology is not just about living in an ivory tower and thinking about great ideas. It's also practical. In fact, for me, theology is always applied theology. You've got to live this thing. And Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. He has given us this commandment to go out and make peace. So what I'd like to ask our four guests before we wrap this up, in 30 seconds, if you could say one thing practically, how we can obey the words of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers. What can I do to be a peacemaker? IK, I'm going to start with you because you're the person next on my screen. And if you could just give one practical step, those of us who are attending can take from here and go and apply it in our lives. And it's the same to Jessica, and then Reverend Nims, and then Poetess Jess. You need to unmute yourself, IK.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So practical step. And I think it sort of goes back to some of the things that were spoken about yesterday, and sort of brought up again today. It talks about being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because you realize that just like what Jess said, I wrote it down. You can't be selfish with peace, and when you sort of realize how sort of peace can be absent in a number of places. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable means just because you may be at peace, you need to be able to give that which you sort of have within you, being able to reach out to somebody else who may be going through something quite difficult. And so for me, it's that knowing that really you can't really be at peace until your neighbor is also at peace with you as well. So allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to actually share, perhaps even in the conflict of a neighbor. Yeah.
Thank you. Jessica?
Thank you, Philip. To some extent, like my thought is literally almost on the same line with IK, but what I'll say is, like David, like you mentioned when we were speaking, there may be some triggers that may be happening because of this conversation that we are having. So personally, I think a practical thing would be to do, if I don't have the peace within me, like we all agreed on, it would be difficult for me to actually get to take it out there. So if you're in a place that you feel for whatever reasons, whatever experiences that you've had, and you really cannot have that peace within you, I think it's best to reach out. There always is help out there. There's always somebody that you could actually get to be vulnerable with, get to talk to, so that at least you could be in a better place, could be in a place that you can take peace out there. Because if you are hurt, you definitely get to hurt other people. So I think just be honest enough and be vulnerable enough to allow for those that have churches and so on, even just here, like David has mentioned, and Philip, you can reach out to David and Philip so that you can be able to be in a place where you can take the peace that is needed in the world out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Nims, what can we do practically? One thing.
Well, one thing I gotta say is, Jess, the prophetess, the prophetess maybe in the future, who knows? Actually hit me with that. I can't be selfish about peace. In my organization, the Peace Alliance, we say peace is everyone's business. Nobody is void from being an activist around peace. All of us can do something. The Bible tells us, the book of Habakkuk says, the burden which Habakkuk saw. Every one of us, something acts as a burden for us. And I think to shy away from that burden is to shy away from how you can be a little catalyst to bring in peace to your community. And so in my community, there was, whilst I was dealing with gun and knife crime, I also realized there was no food. Some kids were going to school without food. Now we run a food hub, food bank that serves, we have over 500-600 people. We give food to every week that provides for them, for their whole family. So, 5,000-6,000 people in our community. So I've chosen not to be selfish about peace. How can I help my community? I want to make sure I give food, I give support. I get involved with being a governor in my school, in my community. I get involved with the educational pathway plans. I get involved with things that help. So, and I encourage people in my community to do so. So it might be a small little thing you can do, but don't despise the small beginnings. Start small. Do something little. It might just be with a little kid. Don't ever think you've got to do the grand things like Tear Fund is doing. Start with a little bit. And maybe part of being a peace advocate might be donating to some of the Tear Fund initiatives. That could be a pathway plan. Different little bits. And then from there, it grows. That's my thought.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Poetess Jess, did you have anything to say practically?
No, just literally what I just said, man. Don't be selfish with peace.
Don't be selfish with peace.
Yeah, don't be objective, be subjective about it. It's made me really think, and it takes me back to like the Bible. I understand when he says like, I dress the lilies of the fields and the birds of the air. And when I read those scriptures now, it makes me think, yeah, because there's a peace that you're trying to cater for everyone, but obviously God has that capacity to cater for everyone, but also know your capacity as well. So, but even though you don't be selfish with it, know your capacity. So yeah.
Thank you for that wisdom. Well, can I just take this opportunity to thank our panelists who have joined us today, Reverend Nims, Jessica, IK, Poetess Jess. I'm just going to have a quick conversation with David before we wrap it up. So David, what a fantastic session we've had here about peace.
Absolutely brilliant. And I'm anticipating you're going to ask me what I'm going to take away. There's a lot to take away from all of it. I think one of the things that really struck me is that peace is not a feeling. It is a feeling, but we can't just reduce it down to that. It's a feeling that produces an action. There's a correlation between the two. And I really was reminded of that. And yeah, that struck me, and I think I'll leave with that as a primary thought in my mind.
Wonderful, David. The thing that's going through my mind in today's session is, how do we create a context in which we're not afraid as Christians to disturb the peace for the sake of peace? Because there is a sense in which the coming of God's kingdom overturns the status quo, which disturbs the peace. But it's of flourishing common good. And there is something of that dynamic that sometimes I think, because churches sometimes get a bit, they get, they want to sort of keep the peace. They don't want to talk about controversial things because they feel disturb the peace. But for God's kingdom to come, the sign of that coming is often the disturbance of the false kind of peace.
Absolutely, and I think you just put the word in there. There's a false peace. There's the world, the enemy always offers a superficial alternative to what God has a genuine and an authentic expression for. And it strikes me that with peace, what happens with that, as you started talking, the word collusion came to mind, that actually what we're doing often is colluding with injustice and colluding with exploitation because we want to maintain a certain peace. And that peace is often because we get patronage, we get benefits for colluding with that system, and we turn a blind eye. It's a kind of willful blindness. But actually, if we take injustice seriously, and we take justice seriously, and as Poet Jess said, we don't have a selfish approach to peace, i.e. that I feel tranquil and immune from all the catastrophes,
the problems in the world,
then actually we move into that realm of that's what I'm saying about it. Becomes a prophetic action. It becomes an imperative of the kingdom to actually make sure thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So peace is actually about saying, if we want something genuine of the kingdom, we've got to reconfigure and reorganize the world as far as we can, at least seek to influence it so that it's in alignment with God. Otherwise, we're dealing with the demonic and the principalities and powers.
Wow. Well, David, it was wonderful to host the session. To our guests who joined us, thank you so much. I'd like to ask you again, if you'd be willing to give to the work that Tear Fund is doing with the self-help groups. We'd love for you to be partners with us to make a response to what God is doing in the world, to empower communities and to see transformation. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the theme of transformation, and it's going to be another fantastic session of applied theology and how good theology can make an impact on our world and bring transformation. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, David, again. It's wonderful to host these sessions with you. Blessings and peace be with all of you. Bye.
Just to remind people, tomorrow morning, prayer at 7, lunchtime theology session, 7:30 tonight, live show, and 9:30 p.m. on Instagram after party. Blessings.